The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. We are live on a Saturday night. We are talking all things WWE Survivor Series War Games, as that pay-per-view premium live event has just completed in Vancouver, British Columbia, and we will take this opportunity to go through the entire card, tell you who were the winners, and maybe some fallout, and some discussion in general about the War Games match and premium live event as a concept. We'll also quickly preview what we know so far from NXT Deadline, which is coming up next weekend, so right back on the horse next week for the WWE on a premium live event. Joining me in studio, as he always does, is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It's going all right. Feels like it's been a while since we've talked wrestling, so yeah, kind of looking forward to getting into it, and lots to talk about from War Games.
Yeah, honestly, we could spend probably the whole episode talking about things that are not War Games, because it has been a couple of months since we did any kind of wrestling talk on the podcast, but good to be back. Speaking of good to be back, good to be joined in the studio tonight by Rachel. Rachel, how's it going?
And it's going good. I am so glad to finally, I feel like it's been forever since I've actually been in studio, so I'm really excited.
Yeah, glad to have you back, and glad to talk some pro wrestling, as tonight was the WWE Survivor Series War Games, one of the big events that WWE puts on every year, and this one, of course, the second oldest premium live event that WWE runs behind WrestleMania. And it was an interesting event. It was only a 5-match card, as has been typical, but because the War Games matches are so long, it really feels like a much longer event than just a 5-match card. Before we get to the specifics of each match and kind of break those down, start with Mike. Mike, your general thoughts about Survivor Series War Games.
Yeah, there was nothing wrong with the event. It was certainly fine. I'm never one to complain when there are fewer matches on a card. I think that's totally reasonable. I do question kind of if we need to have 2 War Games matches themselves each year at Survivor Series. I think it's really one of those matches like Hell in a Cell where a feud really has to qualify for that level of kind of the blow-off ultra match. And I just... With the Bloodline storyline, I totally get it. I don't know if the women's match necessarily needed a War Games based on kind of the fragmented storylines that made up it.
I think a typical Survivor Series match would have actually been more interesting there, because you would have had eliminations throughout the match, and of course you had people on each team that were kind of also enemies in addition to being teammates, so I think you had a lot of potential angles there. We'll get more into that when we talk about the women's War Games match in a minute. But Rachel, just to get your general thoughts on the overall premium live event.
I mean, I agree with Mike. I think that, the whole show as a whole was great. It was fine. It did what it needed to do. But the War Games matches are so long, and the middle matches, even the title matches, you kind of forget about this because the War Games match takes so long, and there's just so much to them that I feel like the middle matches get kind of drowned out.
Well, and you had middle matches that were all title matches in those cases, but you also had matches that, you ended up with another match in the middle of the card that was also a no disqualification match because it was a triple threat match. So you basically have 3 no DQ matches on the card, which can wear your audience out a bit when you're constantly, having shenanigans throughout the entire night. And your War Games matches, just by their very nature, kind of repeat a lot of the same things. So it does, I think, get a bit tough when you have 2 full ones. That being said, the men's War Games match to me was a very solidly put together match. I thought there were some times there that it dragged a bit, but overall it was good. I'll let you guys kind of comment on the women's War Games match because you got to see the entire match. I came in just in the last few minutes, so I think I got to see the good part of the match from what everybody's saying.
Yeah.
Maybe they were just waiting for me to get home from Northern Kentucky to really kick it into another gear, but let's start with the men's War Games match first. It was the last match on the card, and of course it was the OG Bloodline with the addition of CM Punk versus the new Bloodline with the addition of Bronson Reed. And overall, it was a pretty decently booked War Games match. You had all the drama of Punk and Reigns. You had Jacob Fatu being totally ridiculous. You had Solo Sikoa locking the cage. You had Reigns climbing the cage. You had all the big drama spots with Reigns hitting a spear on Punk by mistake and all this other stuff. And in the end, as maybe some of you could have predicted, Sikoa ends up in the ring with all 5 members of the face team who all take turns hitting finishers on him, including Reigns finishing it off with a spear at 41 minutes and 55 seconds to complete the War Games and the match beyond. I kind of give my thoughts on it first. Like I said, the match was completely fine. I think the issue with the War Games matches is it does tend to drag a bit, and I think, luckily WWE has smartly shortened these cards up. I mean, we're talking about a show that started at 6, it got done about 9:30, so 3.5 hours. That's pretty reasonable. So I didn't feel like it affected the audience that much. I felt like the crowd was still really hot for all the big spots and all the chants. So I guess maybe it's just my fatigue. It's been a long day for me. Maybe I was just worn out by the end of it. But there were times where I just felt like they were just kind of, you end up waiting around for something to happen. Like everybody's kind of, okay, we got to get over here so we can do this next spot. And we got to get over here so we can do this next spot. And, I get that that's kind of the nature of the beast. But it sometimes it does make it drag a bit. But, of course, you come out of it, it makes it look like Punk is not necessarily in a hurry to cash in that favor, but we've been reminded that it's kind of sitting in the background as he's going to probably go back to Raw. And I'm guessing have to deal with Seth Rollins probably in the near future. And then you've got the Bloodline situation, which, I don't think it's resolved. I think we're clearly going to continue to move forward. I think Roman Reigns, still really hasn't baby-faced himself at all. He's still kind of the guy that is...
With the exception of the handshake. That is like the only kind of... And him helping Punk up after he saved him. Those were the only glimpses so far that, like, hey, we're not evil.
Yeah, see, he did hug Jimmy at the end, too. Like, when they were all with
But I feel like there's still more to go there, but obviously the storyline's never ending. It'll go forever. They keep signing people that are in the Bloodline, so I'm sure we can make this go for a long time. But let's get Rachel's thoughts next. Again, overall, I thought it was fine. And I think the guys all deserve a lot of credit for just the crap they went through with the high spots and stuff. But overall, it was fine. And I think that's kind of, I guess, all you can really ask for. Rachel, your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I agree. I think that everyone kind of shined the way they needed to. Bronson Reed looked fantastic. And, good reminder that he's also could be a part of a Bloodline because he's Samoan as well. Sami Zayn looked great. I love having God go against the Usos because, that's bound to happen eventually anyway. I love the back and forth between CM Punk and Roman Reigns because that match is going to be down the road somewhere too. Jacob Fatu no selling so many moves, especially even the move where he got flipped onto the toolbox. That was horrifying, but he just hopped up like it was nothing, and he's someone that's going to be just huge as his career goes on.
Yeah, they're clearly building him to be a monster, and it's a monster that at least a few of the people in this match are going to have to probably deal with in a singles capacity sooner rather than later. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, a couple thoughts. I think both in the men's and the women's match, you kind of key in on a couple of the participants thinking they're the ones who are really going to shine in that environment. And kind of to Rachel's point, I think we saw that both in Bronson Reed and Jacob Fatu. But from the beginning, you see Tama Tonga come in the ring as the first entry for the new Bloodline, and you can't help but be happy for the guy.
Yeah.
He and Tonga Loa getting another shot in WWE, and Bronson Reed making his way back, and here they are in a main event of this pay-per-view looking like gold. I don't know if you were to rank all the people who have left New Japan and are now parts of an American wrestling promotion, I don't know how you don't look at those guys as far as where they are now as being right there at the top as far as what you've done post New Japan.
Again, it shows you that if what you think of a wrestler is completely determined by how they're booked. It really is that simple. In the end, yes, you're trying to portray a sports-based presentation, if you will, but in the end, it is a story. And if you build a story and tell me that this guy is the most dangerous guy ever, and you freak out when they sign him because they were never supposed to bring him to WWE and Jacob Fatu because he was too dangerous to be around people, and then you basically have booked him that way since the beginning, that's a story you can tell. It makes a ton of sense. Not to get into too much AEW during this WWE talk, but it's exactly where they faltered with guys where they haven't. Maybe when they first come in, they're the game changer, they're the big guy, and then their booking doesn't line up with what you're telling me. So it does two things. It damages them first and foremost. But then when you bring in the next game changer, I just sit there and say, well, he's going to be good for 2 or 3 weeks, and then you're going to have him have crappy booking, and Chris Jericho's going to get in a feud with him, and then, we're going to be down that spiral. I mean, again, it's about how you present them to the new audience, and I think if you rely on people, we book for the sickos who watch New Japan, so they know this guy's a big deal, so we don't have to present him that way. Eventually, your crowd's going to stop thinking of him that way, and they're just going to think of him as some guy, whereas, maybe a lot of guys only remember Bronson Reed from his first run in WWE, where he really didn't do much on the main roster, or, the Guerrillas of Destiny, you've heard about them, but you didn't really know, like, what they were capable of, and now they look like their main stars, and it's all, again, part of this Bloodline storyline.
Oh, yeah, it's fantastic. I love what they've done with them.
But it's, it'll be interesting to see kind of where that goes. Like you said, there's clearly some tag matches that could happen there. There's obviously more drama to go with Solo. And, of course, will The Rock come back? I think that's in the back of your mind because, that's kind of hanging over this whole thing is when will The Rock come back? What will he do when he comes back?
You always kind of thought, and this was in your mind probably most of this year, that there would come a point in time where Solo would be usurped as the leader of that faction of the Bloodline and The Rock step in as kind of the real leader, the final boss, as it were. So you kind of wonder, with Saturday night's main event coming up and Royal Rumble, is that something we might actually still build to?
Well, Netflix, too.
Yeah.
Well, and if it's not The Rock, it may be Jacob Fatu.
Yeah.
Because, again, you could easily line those other guys up under Jacob as the guys that he brought in, the outsiders, and Solo is still, really related to those other guys. And,
sure.
So, and Solo has gotten over somehow. Like, it's worked.
Yeah.
And Jacob Fatu deserves a lot of the credit for that. But, where they go from here, because there's no doubt Jacob Fatu in the next 6 to 12 months is going to be a world title level competitor. Yeah. How do you get to that point? So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out.
I do have to mention real quick, too, I totally lost my train of thought. Bronson Reed.
Yeah.
His move off the top of the cage, absolutely absurd.
Yeah.
Like the tsunami, knowing you're kind of going to go through that table, I just... not taking nothing away from the other 3 people who did moves from the top of the cage tonight, but man, that was wild.
Yeah, and you just worry about the long-term health of guys when they go through like that because, you're landing on your knees. Like, that's going to hurt your knees and your hips, and he's a big dude. So, crazy to take that move, but he did really well. And, again, a lot of guys came out of that match looking good, and it'll be interesting to see what the next chapter of the Bloodline will be. Let's head to the Women's War Games match. This actually kicked off the program, which meant I didn't get to watch all of it. And, you had your babyface team that was kind of piecemeal together. Of course, Bayley being the last piece after Jade Cargill was attacked backstage. Against your heel team where you have all this infighting. You've got both world champions. You've got the Money in the Bank briefcase holder. It was kind of a late throw together. You had a lot of drama potentially between members of each team. And in the end, they had, from what I understand, the beginning of the match was a little rough. The end of the match was pretty good. And they got to the finish, and the face team ended up winning in 38 minutes and 10 seconds. And, again, and I'll let Mike kind of kick this one off, because, again, you two got to see more of this than I did. I think there's another match where at least a couple of people in the match came out looking really strong and going to probably propel them into the world title picture sooner rather than later. But again, from everything I've read online and the things you guys have said off the air, it just kind of felt like there were some misses early on that maybe have affected people's perception of how the match went in total.
Yeah, the start of the match kind of felt like it was in slow motion. I wasn't really looking forward to more in-ring work between Bayley and Nia Jax. I feel like I've had my fill of that for a lifetime. But here we are with them two starting the match and just really feeling kind of clunky, like they weren't on the same page. Next we have Naomi and Candice LeRae coming in, and numerous instances of the use of chairs, which felt like they were swinging them at about 5% effort. instances where they would go to swing and the person would just be sitting there kind of with their head forward. So like they stopped swinging because they didn't want to crown the person with it. So then they kind of like had to move around and like awkwardly use it to hit him in the back instead of the head. It really took a while for this match to get started. One takeaway, and kind of what I mentioned earlier, you look for certain people to shine in this situation, and obviously Io Sky's been in every women's War Games match. You knew she was going to look good, but Tiffany Stratton obviously on that same level as far as just athleticism. Pretty early on when they both got in the ring, you had this little exchange of them doing kind of acrobatic counters to each other, which just tells you, man, we really need to see that singles match sooner rather than later. And really, that's when it started getting interesting. She started having people in the ring that you kind of wanted to see wrestle each other. And even though I like a lot of the participants in the match, I didn't really care to see many of them facing off against each other in a War Games type scenario.
I think the challenge, and I know they try to do this because over the years, if you go back to the history of War Games back in WCW, the heels always had the advantage. Always.
Yeah.
Because that's how you have to build the match to make the most sense. The heels keep coming in, they outnumber the faces, they build heat.
That way you have the big super face at the end as the last person coming in.
And the thing is, if you have the heels have the advantage in this match, and you start the match with, say, Bayley and Candice LeRae, two people who are work rate people who can go in and wrestle for 3 to 5 minutes, and basically, you get LeRae to take a cheap shot, thumb to the eye, something like that, take control, and you have them go, and then you have maybe Bayley gets a comeback in the last minute to take the advantage, and then Nia Jax comes in first.
Yeah.
Now you've got your big, strong heel coming in, and you can push around the babyface for 3 minutes to build heat for the next babyface. And then, you build the drama. You maybe have Io Sky come in next. Was she going to help Bayley? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe she's going to come in and attack Bayley. Maybe it's going to be a 3-on-1. That's how you can set the match up where you can have these baby faces coming in to help that also are conflicted, so you build some drama there too. Your thoughts on this, Rachel? Because again, I didn't get to see this whole match, but just kind of piecing things together, I feel like they could have maybe structured it in a different way, starting with the advantage, but obviously that's been settled. There's nothing you can do about that now, but I feel like they could have maybe structured it in a different way that could have worked a little better.
I mean, I totally thought that they were going to bring Nia Jax in last instead of like Liv Morgan, because that made more sense. She's a champion too, and she's just a powerhouse. She could just go in and like clean house, kind of like a Royal Rumble, like throwing people around. But I agree with Mike completely. I feel like having those two start the match was rough, and the chair shots were like if like kids were like siblings were like fighting, and you didn't want to really hurt each other, so you just go dink, like to their back, like that. Until Io Sky came in, she was the first one to actually use a chair and actually hit somebody with like real force. And Rhea's mask tonight, I know people are going to be talking about that. That was so cool looking. I was almost sad when she took it off.
And I think that's where maybe WWE does deserve a little criticism in how they've structured these. And something that we've talked about a lot when we used to review like New Japan pay-per-views is some of these, like Wrestle Kingdom, where you would have match after match doing all this stuff, and it's like, you're not paying attention to what's going on later on. It's going to hurt. If you get with whoever's booking the men's War Games match, say, hey, there's a spot where we're going to be throwing chairs at each other in the ring. It's going to look pretty nasty. Maybe you decide to go with kendo sticks instead of chairs. And kendo sticks are something that's a little easier to have a safe, aggressive hit that's going to make a loud noise without having to worry about crowning somebody over the head. You can just hit them in the stomach if they're coming at you. It's not awkward. So, it's hindsight's 20/20, obviously. I'm sure they kind of regret that it kind of worked out that way, too.
I mean, they did use a toilet seat.
They did.
And the men's match did not use a toilet seat.
Well, it may never happen again. I just saw Skibbity Toilet trending, and that is a disaster when you got brain rot trending during your women's War Games match. But I think you brought it up, Mike, so I want to let you expand upon the thought. We talked before kind of about how there are so many levels of hate amongst these two teams. You've got former friends that are now rivals that are like allies, but very begrudgingly. You had two world champions and a Money in the Bank briefcase winner who pulled the briefcase out in the middle of the match and literally did nothing with it other than hold it up in the air. It felt like there were some missed opportunities to have some extra drama in this match that maybe could have made the match, even if it was a little rough around the edges, a little more intriguing.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking back at it now, you had that scenario where Raquel ends up getting handcuffed. It's like, would that not have been the ultimate opportunity for Tiffany to cash in on Liv, given Raquel can't do anything about it?
Right.
I think that certainly could have been a thing. I don't know. The whole thing's weird now when you think about it, because you have Jade Cargill getting injured. Who did it? We don't know yet. Like, the prevailing wisdom is it was probably Bianca Belair to facilitate this heel turn, but then it's like, why would she have done that with the possibility that Bayley would then be inserted as a member of her team when she doesn't like Bayley?
Yeah.
Why is Io Sky in this match when she doesn't like Bayley? She doesn't like... I mean, there's just so many weird relationship issues there where it made... You kind of had a similar thing with the men's match, but that felt a little more well built because you had CM Punk on the team, who obviously doesn't like Roman Reigns. Reigns doesn't like Punk, but they both have this mutual respect thing with Heyman. I just think there was way too much going on in the women's match for ultimately nothing to come out of it. It just ended up being another instance where you make Rhea Ripley look super strong again.
Yeah, and of course she gets the pin again on Liv Morgan, so that issue evidently is not over. That we're going to continue that, and I saw a lot of, issues online, people complaining, oh, we're going to continue that. And I think it was kind of inevitable, but at the same time, I do kind of get that feeling that, hey, you kind of want to see both of them go on and do something else.
My concern, too, is that when you have this match where Ripley has this orbital bone fracture, she shouldn't even be in the match, but she is in the match, and she gets the win, do you start risking having the crowd kind of turn on her? Because as cool as she is, like, you kind of get tired of her seemingly being invincible.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and I'm not sure, what's going to happen with her. It'll be interesting to see, but I almost think they could have gone a route where they just, all of those internal feuds on each team could have just blown up, and they could have started fighting each other, but then also still fighting the other team because they both really wanted to win, and you could have had just this chaotic War Games match where you had a bunch of people all fighting, and one of them happens to luck into a pinfall, and their team wins, but they're not really a team anymore.
I think that would have been a lot more interesting because, I mean, like Mike said, the drama could have been there. It felt like just a random, regular match that, like, we're just going to talk about the rest of the drama. We're just going to fight. And
it's weird, too, because, after the event, when Michael Cole and Corey Graves were talking about it, they mentioned Rhea Ripley getting the pin on Liv Morgan, and does that move her to the front of the line for a title shot? Well, of course it does. But then you think, but the heel team had both the champions. Like, what's the incentive for the heel team to even want to be in this match?
Yeah.
Like, there's no kind of advantageous victory they could get, which could propel them into a women's title match.
Yeah, for sure.
With the exception of Stratton, who could cash in, but that's really it.
And one point about Stratton before we move on to kind of the general question about War Games before we get to our individual title matches. For people who did not watch SmackDown last night, and probably a lot of people skipped it because it was Black Friday and it was taped, and a lot of people might have skipped out. I think they missed something that should be, I think all the signs have been pointing towards it, but it was another very important sign as to what the plans are for Tiffany Stratton, and it was Tiffany Stratton hosting the merchandise of commercial, basically backstage, very babyface-ish, not like insulting people. It was, buy my merch, here's my sweater, very like, okay, like they clearly get it. She's going to be a baby face somewhere down the line, and she's going to be really popular. So here, let's put her in an advertisement and start just teasing it a little further.
She got probably the best pop in that Women's War Games match, if I had to guess.
Well, especially when she almost came out and then they brought her back. Like, no, you're not going out yet.
Oh, yeah, Candice LeRae jumped in front of her to take her spot, which,
and the crowd booed.
Yeah, and again, you have someone like Io Sky who's willing to do these crazy moves off the top of the cage. I think they realize with Io, it's hard to make her a real heel because you're just inclined to want to cheer for her.
Yeah.
Well, she was cheering for herself when she did the move off the top of the cage, and she's
laying
like,
there half dead, still cheering. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's great stuff, obviously. So it'll be interesting to see, what they do with Stratton, because clearly champs are still both heels. She's still a face. We've got a couple of big events coming up with Saturday night's main event and the Netflix debut. So you have to feel like one of those might be a really logical point to have that feel-good moment at the end of the show where she cashes in, presumably against Jax, which makes the most sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And gets the pin, because that's where you're going to get the most face pop out of it, and then you can have that be her first feud, which also allows to build heat and all this other stuff. But the bigger question is, before we move on to the individual title matches, is kind of the War Games concept in and of itself. And we've talked about before, and I know you'll probably bring this point up again, Mike, so I don't want to talk too much on it, about whether these gimmick matches really deserve a whole pay-per-view because you book yourself into a corner, or in this case, maybe don't book yourself into a corner, and then you end up having to scramble together to throw matches together because you have to have War Games. The counterpoint, obviously, is Survivor Series was really hurting as a pay-per-view event, and it was kind of the one that people liked the least. The traditional Survivor Series matches had kind of gone away. They did this brand supremacy thing, which generally meant nothing. NXT won it the one year, and look what it did for them. Literally nothing. Half those guys are on AEW now, and so
But they're killing it.
So it's like, I don't generally have a problem with this having War Games at Survivor Series to kind of spice up the event, but the question is, should there be 2 War Games matches at Survivor Series, or do you maybe alternate? Maybe the even years, the men have the War Games match and the women have the 5-on-5 traditional Survivor Series match, and then the next year you flip them, and whoever is the War Games match is your main event. So you just have that built-in cycle, but also you can book the matches totally different because they're totally different matches, and then you don't have to repeat spots, and you don't have 45 minutes of this and then kind of the same thing 3 hours later. Get Rachel's thoughts on this first, and then we'll let Mike kind of finish the topic on it. But your thoughts on maybe changes to War Games going forward.
I think it'd be a good idea to have just one War Games match. I'm still a huge fan. I mean, we grew up watching like VHS, like Survivor Series from the video place in Bland, and I love the traditional 5-on-5 elimination type matches. War Games, there's not an elimination, so you're waiting so long for the match to even start, and having 2 of those in one card is just a lot. So I think it would be a great idea to have one be traditional, old school, not even brand supremacy, like you said. That meant nothing, but just traditional, old, like 1990s style, just without the gobbledygooker.
No, we got to have him back. Your thoughts, Mike?
Why can't you have all of it? Why can't you decide kind of at the beginning of the year? Because you feel like they do kind of book their plots a lot earlier now than they used to. Kind of decide what major feud is ultimately going to lead to a War Games. What feuds maybe aren't quite there yet and can be a part of an elimination style match. And then for people who aren't involved in that, why don't you do some sort of brand supremacy match where the winner gets to be number 30 in the Rumble or something like that? Like, you can do something like that has stakes, that isn't bragging rights, but something tangible that you can actually justify these people wanting to wrestle each other, even though they don't wrestle on the same brand.
Yeah, I could see that. Although I would say it might be hard to fill out your War Games card. Like, you want to go wrestle in War Games and kill yourself and maybe lose? Or do you want to wrestle in this other match to get number 30 in the Royal Rumble and maybe get the title shot at WrestleMania?
Well, I think that's where having that storyline fit for War Games makes all the difference. If you have people who really are in this blood feud, that they're going to want to be in that blood feud. It's just, if you haven't reached that point, then you're not ready for War Games.
Yeah. They need to figure something else out. I mean, I say this, but they did announce they drew the largest gate for a Canadian event tonight at War Games, and obviously part of that is the ticket prices are really insanely high for these events now. But over 16,000, I think, was the last ticket count I saw from WrestleTix. So, for all the complaining about it, it sells, and I'm sure if it just continues to sell, they're just going to continue to do 2 War Games matches and then not worry about changing it up. But
look at the depth of talent that they had on the card, and then think of what they didn't have on the card. I mean, Cody wasn't there, Rollins wasn't there,
Owens
wasn't there. Like, yet you still had this tremendously stacked card. I think people are willing to pay when you're going to give them that quality.
Yeah, and then again, you have Saturday night's main event in a couple weeks that you're going to have to build another really good card because it's on NBC and you want it to be a big deal, and so there is something to be said for that as well, that they have just a lot of talent right now and they're spreading it out, which is better for everybody involved as it goes. But just some thoughts on the War Games concept, which again, I do enjoy. I just maybe it's time to tweak it a little bit just to try to figure out something to keep it interesting so it doesn't burn out like the brand supremacy did or, the 5-on-5 matches did. Just try to mix it up a little bit. But we did have 3 title matches on the card. We'll get to those now. We won't have as much to say on those just because the matches were a lot shorter. We'll talk about the World Heavyweight title match first. We had Gunther against Damian Priest. Of course, the whole build to this was that somehow Gunther, because he lost to Cody Rhodes in Saudi Arabia, was now terrible and had no confidence, and he was just a shell of a man. And somehow Damian Priest, because of question mark, is now all of a sudden supremely confident and was going to, just come in and wreck shop. And of course that didn't happen. Priest an early arm injury that was worked through the whole match, and eventually Gunther choked him out in 19 minutes and 17 seconds to retain the World Heavyweight Championship. Good match, as you would expect. These guys are both good. You had Finn Balor come in with a coup de grace that basically was the next to finishing blow. And so that feud must continue. So we're going to continue down that road of Judgment Day versus old Judgment Day. And Gunther moves on presumably to a new challenger at some point. We'll let Mike go first on this one. General thoughts on the match and the aftermath.
Yeah, the match went pretty much how I expected. I figured Balor would get involved. I think the build-up to it's been kind of funny because it's this really awkward, like somewhat face turn for Gunther, while not heel-turning Priest. So Priest kind of comes off like a jerk, but not a bad guy toward Gunther. Like during their in-ring segments together, like he kind of sounds heelish, but you don't really think they're turning him. It's just been pretty odd. But kind of playing into that, Gunther, doesn't have that mystique about him anymore because he lost to Cody. God knows what Seth Rollins must be now, how many times he's lost to Cody Rhodes. But yeah, and kind of to my point, too, about Gunther, it's like they made the point to have Gunther take out Balor after he attacked Priest, kind of saying, hey, I'm not the dude that needs help to beat this guy. So, yeah, it'll be interesting where it goes from here. I like all 3 of these guys. I wouldn't mind seeing them in some multi-person match later. And who knows, maybe we can even give Balor a title again.
It's possible. I mean, I also think when you talk about potentially turning Gunther face to some degree, that could be leading to a feud with Ludwig Kaiser because they've had some issues in the recent time. And clearly they're pushing Kaiser up the card pretty quickly, and we'll talk more about him in a moment. But Rachel, your thoughts first on this world title match.
I mean, what I saw of it was good. I did miss the small portion at the beginning. I expected Gunther to retain. I didn't expect him to choke out Damian Priest, but
none of us did.
No. I did like that Finn did get involved. I didn't think about that when I was filling out our little scorecards. But I can't wait to see what comes out. Does he go after Gunther? Does he still go after Damian Priest too? I don't know. I'm excited to see what they do with Finn, 'cause I'd like to see him become champion again.
Yeah, I think, because we already have Cody on Saturday night's main event, I would presume that means Gunther's next title match. We're probably looking at the Netflix debut, potentially. Would make a lot of sense. But it'll be interesting to see who they line up for him. Like I said, is it Ludwig Kaiser? Is it Drew McIntyre? Because obviously he's going to be coming back into the picture pretty soon and doesn't really have a natural next opponent.
Probably doesn't want any more of CM Punk if I had to get
Probably not. And the fans like McIntyre, and I think it would be real easy to sell to babyface him to some degree by just kind of cooling him off a little bit as far as like the edge to his character. I think people would be pretty quick to get back behind him again. And he's another guy that always deserves another title opportunity. So he really hasn't had that moment as a babyface. Mm-mm. So that could be something you could build to down the road as well. So, but again, good match. Gunther retains. Not a huge shock there as his title reign is going to continue. We move on to the United States title match, and that was the second match on the card, but it was our one title change as the new Shinsuke Nakamura, which if Vince were still here, that's exactly what we'd be calling him, is the new Shinsuke Nakamura with his new music.
He's an artist.
He's yes. He ends up winning relatively cleanly over LA Knight in 9 minutes and 41 seconds to win the United States title. I was not shocked that he won. I mean, I was a little shocked that I didn't pick it, but I kind of thought in WWE booking style they would do some sort of nonsense finish that would lead to a rematch maybe on Saturday night's main event, and he'd win it there. But clearly they came back. He came back with the mindset they were going to push him. So they push him all the way to the title, and he gets the win in under 10 minutes. And again, pretty clean victory overall. Rachel, your thoughts on this one first?
Yeah, I was hoping he would win. Just like you, I didn't pick him. I'm happy for him, though, because I feel like he has not done much in the last few years. And hopefully this new presentation of him, like Corey was saying tonight, like no one really knows the Shinsuke from Japan. Like he's not been as ruthless as he was in Japan. So this is the Japan version of Shinsuke is how he was describing him tonight.
I love every time he turns heel, he's the Japanese version of Shinsuke.
Right.
Like he's extra vicious, like, you know. But yeah, I am always happy to see him win. It's interesting how it all kind of went down with no real nonsense and Knight taking a clean loss and kind of what that means for him. Mike, your thoughts on the match?
I feel like they had that set up from the beginning as far as the announcers just telling you just how kind of out of it Knight feels. And, you know, he's on top of his game tonight. And Nakamura's really got him
must win.
It is a must
absolutely. But Nakamura's got him all kind of messed up with mind games and whatever. And yeah, I'm always a little skeptical when they bring somebody back with like a not repackaging, which is kind of what they did here, where he's still the same dude. He just has makeup on his face and looks darker now, and his theme is a little remixed to sound more evil. And they do kind of have a cool video behind, like his like Titantron has this really cool imagery to it now, but you're never really sold that they're actually going to book this guy strong when they do this. They've done that so many times, but yeah, I'm stoked about this. I hope they let him kind of be Shinsuke Nakamura and actually beat people convincingly for a little bit.
Yeah, it would be great to see. And as we talked about while we watched the event, but worth mentioning to our audience that Nakamura for the second year in a row is going to be going to Japan. He's going to be wrestling on Pro Wrestling Noah's New Year's Day show again. So I think the old WWE would be like, we're not going to have you mention the title. We're not going to have you take the title. You just feel like in the new WWE, they're like, yes, you take the U.S. title, you wear it, you know, have them announce you as the WWE United States champion. Like everything you can do to just put over the fact that you're one of our champions and we're sending you over here for this match.
I never get tired of them mentioning things like that on their programming. On SmackDown the other night, them during a match between Nakamura and
Andrade?
Yeah, they were talking about how they feuded for the IWGP Intercontinental title back in 2013. It's like, like, I'm glad you mentioned that. Even though I should be used to it now because they do that a lot more frequently, but I never get tired of that.
Yeah, it never would have happened before.
I think that came up again tonight during his intro where they mentioned his IWGP title. Sadly, the Intercontinental title no longer existing, so that's very sad that was gotten rid of. One of the many mistakes New Japan has made over the last few years, but yeah, it's great to see Nakamura look strong. And again, you know, they sold the whole Knight being off his game thing, so I think it'll work just fine. There are a lot of people that Nakamura could feud with. Obviously, you've got Andrade, you've got Carmelo Hayes, you've got a rematch with LA Knight. Presuming he gets healthy at some point, you know, I would love to see he and AJ Styles have another feud, a proper feud, booked around just wrestling and not nonsense. So
I just don't think we're really going to get the old or the Japanese Shinsuke Nakamura until we can get Toru Yano over here to hang out with him. I feel like we need old school chaos or something.
Best we can do is the picture of one of the women wrestlers from AEW took a picture on Thanksgiving Day, and like there's Nakamura in the background cooking dinner. Like, you know, it's like that's, you know, Nakamura is evil, but he's also a great chef. So we got to have him back there cooking, and so that's kind of cool to see. And I think that's another thing that's very underrated right now is how the Japanese talent in the U.S. have clearly really kind of bonded together and try to make the whole experience better for all, regardless of what company they're working in, which is great to see because it's a very different world in the United States than it is in Japan. But congratulations to Nakamura. I'll be curious to see where this storyline goes from here. Final title match was the Intercontinental title match, and Mike kind of predicted this would potentially steal the show, and I think it's fair to say it wouldn't be a stretch to say it was the best match on the card. It was the champion Braun Breaker against Ludwig Kaiser versus Sheamus, triple threat match. It being another no DQ match, they positioned it in the middle of the card to get it away from the two War Games matches. And it was a battle, and a couple of really good false finishes. Looked like Sheamus was going to pull it off. Kaiser pulls the referee out of the ring. And in the end, Braun Breaker gets the spear on Sheamus and gets the pin in 14-24. And it was another really good match between these guys that have great chemistry. I wonder if they're holding off on this whole Sheamus winning the title to a big event like WrestleMania, because they talk about it so much that you just can't imagine they're not going to give it to him at some point before his career comes to an end. But Breaker continues on. He looks stronger than ever. Rachel, your thoughts generally on the triple threat match?
Well, I know like those parts of the match where the crowd was so like sympathetically behind Sheamus. I'm like, man, they really want him to win. But then like 2 minutes later, they were like doing the dog barking thing for Braun Breaker. I'm like, oh, okay. No, it was a great match. Braun Breaker looked extremely strong. He's just a beast. The way he moves, the moves he does that are just so fast. Like, eventually when he eventually does lose this title, he's going to be in the main title picture 100%. Ludwig Kaiser looked great. I pretty much assumed he was in the match to take a beating, and he did. But he still looked strong. He wasn't just there to like get the pin, like get pinned. He was there to actually wrestle, and he looked really good. Yeah,
for sure. It was a match where everybody ended up having their moments. Mike, your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I felt bad during part of the match because I really like Sheamus, and I think he still can really go. But when you put him in there with Ludwig Kaiser and Braun Breaker, to me, it almost makes him seem old and slow, because these two dudes they're the future. I think either one of them, if not both of them, could be main event contenders in the near future. And it's great that they kind of get Sheamus to work off of just to highlight them further. But I enjoy. There are certain wrestlers who, when you put them together, they just produce really quality matches. These guys are examples of that. Gunther, you put these guys in with Gunther, they can do wonderful things. I really thought they were going to give it to Sheamus this time, as much as they talk about it, and they haven't yet. So we'll see. Did you see the thing the other day that ESPN came out with as far as like the top wrestlers under 30?
I just saw that Jordan Grace, I think, made the list again.
Can you fathom Braun Breaker was number 11 on that list?
Wow.
I mean, that's just nuts. Like, just looking at the list real quick, number 1, you had Dominic Mysterio.
I saw that.
I mean, as far as character work goes, I mean, the guy's good enough in the ring, but man, he's just you can't not feel a way about the dude.
Right.
For sure.
MJF number 2. I feel like there would have been a long period of time where he would have been 1 in people's eyes.
Yeah. I'm not even sure I agree with that. No. I think his ship has kind of sailed at this point.
He's dropped.
I would agree. As we continue, we got Toni Storm at 3.
She's certainly, we talk about someone who's done the character work bit. She's absolutely nailed that. And if she ever pitched that in WWE and they never went along with it, then shame on them, because clearly she had a vision for that and it's kind of revitalized her career.
Yeah.
Number 4 could probably be the number 1, Rhea Ripley.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
It's almost unfair just because you feel like she's already at the top.
Yeah.
It's like, almost like she should just be disqualified from this list because she's already made. But yeah, for sure, she could definitely be number 1.
Then rounding out the top 10, we have at 5, Mariah May. Number 6, Konosuke Takeshita. Number 7, Jack Perry.
Why?
I don't buy that at all.
Number 8, Kyle Felcher or Fletcher.
I mean, that dude's good. I mean, you can moan about it all you want, but that dude can absolutely go. He's the next Will Ospreay. And
well, it's telling that even Cornette and Last kind of talk about the dude, despite kind of what they've done with him on their programming, that they don't crap on the guy really.
Yeah,
that's impressive
because they know he can go.
Yeah,
like he's really good, and his ceiling will inevitably be determined by whatever company he works for. But as far as like what he brings to the table, I 100% agree with that.
And then number 9, we have Daniel Garcia, and number 10, Shota Umino.
Garcia, I don't really agree. I think he's a little overrated when there was a lot of talk of him coming to WWE. But he's so young that there's time, I think, for him to maybe make something. Umino, again, maybe. But I would say the same thing about Takeshita. They're always going to be a little bit limited in the States because of the language barrier. And I don't know if Japan has enough money to keep both of them in Japan long enough to be the next Okada or Naito. Obviously Takeshi's pretty much already come over here almost full time, and Umino probably isn't too far behind, as much as New Japan doesn't want to hear that. because in the end, when his contract's up, Tony's going to offer him a crap load of money as a favor to Moxley to bring him in.
Sure.
So I just, I'm not sure. I'm not sure those guys, what their ceiling will be in AEW, because that's probably where they're going to both end up full time. And again, I haven't seen them really make a big star out of an international wrestler yet.
No.
And so we'll see.
But you think of the names I just mentioned, and here we have Breaker at 11. I think maybe we're kind of missing the mark there.
Yeah.
It feels like an AEW fan wrote this list.
Yeah, some other notables. Austin Theory at 15.
Okay.
I think he's capable of great things if they ever figure out how to get him there.
Yeah, and that's my fear with him, is that they're just never going to figure that out, that he's just a guy that's going to end up in that floating mid-card where he's just going to end up and having to go somewhere else to kind of find that character that gets him over.
Well, while he doesn't have the same character, I feel kind of similarly about him as I do like a Dolph Ziggler.
Yeah.
A guy who you don't understand why he wasn't just a mainstay at the top of the card.
Oh, yeah.
Has all the physical talent in the world,
Charisma.
can even be a character. We saw Theory in NXT, just being hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jordan Grace at 16. Tiffany Stratton at 18.
Huh.
I think maybe that was a little underrated too.
Yes.
Yeah, I think she and Grace both should be top 10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jordan Grace, again, is kind of in the Rhea Ripley category where she's kind of already there.
Yeah.
So I think people underrate her because of that. But, I mean, she's going to be in the Royal Rumble almost certainly. She may win the Royal Rumble. Would not shock me.
No.
Her contract's up early 2025. I'd be shocked if she went anywhere but WWE. They've treated her nothing other than just the biggest star out there.
Yeah. Yep.
Really, you could argue they've treated her on par with Rhea Ripley as far as the way they've presented her in her time in NXT and in WWE.
Yeah.
She's like a Jacob Fatu, but not signed with the company.
Yeah.
Right.
Number 20, Roxanne Perez.
Ooh.
She's an interesting case, and I think in the new WWE, I think she's probably a little underrated on that list because she's really good, and she's proven she can be a heel or a face, and she's undersized for sure, but she can wrestle. It'll be interesting to see where she ends up going.
I think you create those mid-card SmackDown Raw women's titles with someone like her in mind, almost like a Candice LeRae, too. Those people who you don't really see them competing on a regular basis with a Rhea Ripley, but they're going to put on good matches.
Yeah.
Let's see, Wheeler Yuta at 21.
I can't. I honestly have not seen enough of his stuff to have a real opinion on him one way or the other. He's got a dumb name. But
Someone who I think is definitely overrated. If you want to rate him this low because just lack of actual match quantity, Logan Paul at number 22.
Yeah, that's tough because he's done really good things, but
Limited things.
things, and it's still pretty clear for all his talk about how he was going to be more full-time in WWE that he's not. He's not around. He was nowhere. I presume he'll be coming back around when we get to the Royal Rumble and the WrestleMania season, but
He seems like someone you would want at Saturday Night's Main Event.
You would think. But to me, he's just, I don't know that he's ever going to be full-time enough to really be a wrestling star. He's going to be a star, and they'll bring him in and use him that way, but he's never going to be the full package because I don't think that's what he wants. So and he's
got so much stuff and so much money.
Yeah, he didn't really need it.
Julia Hart 26, Dragon Lee 29.
Dragon Lee's an interesting one because I feel like a lot of people were really high on him for a while, and then he kind of cooled off, and then he signed with WWE, and they still kind of haven't figured out what his niche is in WWE other than just being Rey Mysterio's friend.
Yeah.
It's
hard to get out of Rey Mysterio's shadow.
It is.
You're right.
And he's really good. I feel like that's kind of their next area of emphasis. They need to figure out how to book these luchadors.
Yeah.
Because
Santos Escobar's really good.
Santos Escobar's really
good.
Yeah.
Yes.
And assuming that nothing falls through, at some point you may end up with the Lucha Brothers, and those guys have to be pushed big from day one, especially for everything they've had to go through to get out of AEW. So you need to figure this out. And you need to figure out how, because the other thing, too, is they clearly want to run Mexico. They want to run probably Arena Mexico if they can figure that out with CMLL. you're going to want some of these guys at the top of the card, world title to world tag titles before you decide to do that. So
it's going to be interesting when they start trying to delve into Mexico, like how the Mexican companies treat them because they're so hate-filled toward each other.
Yeah.
Like, is WWE so big that both those companies just like, look, we'll do what you want us to do. Like, whatever.
I think there's some of that for sure. I'll be curious to see whenever the arrangement between AAA and AEW expires, if that doesn't end up being a partner for WWE in Mexico. Obviously, there's pretty good relations between Conan and WWE.
Yeah.
I don't think AEW is a real big fan of Conan at the moment, mainly because of the Lucha Brother thing, but for some other reasons as well.
Well, he's critical of them.
He is.
Like, if he doesn't like what you're doing, and, he's buddies with Disco, and they don't like Disco either, so, you know. But all that aside, we need Vampiro in the Hall of Fame.
Yes.
Yeah, man. Can we get that poor dude a better final match? And I know he's going to keep wrestling, but the match we watched the other day where they had the glow-in-the-dark outfits except for him. And
that was weird.
And then he won, and then he put his jacket on and got in a coffin. And that was his symbolism that his career was over, but he's going to keep wrestling.
He's one of those dudes that would have been amazing in like the theatrical matches.
Oh, for
during
sure.
the pandemic. That was just. I mean, even in WCW, they had the one that was kind of like at a graveyard between he and the Kiss Demon or someone like that.
Wow.
AAA is kind of a mess right now. I mean, it always has been, but it's kind of especially a mess at the moment. I think if WWE is going to have a relationship with them, they're going to have to sever their relationship with a few guys, including Alberto El Patron, because there's no way that WWE is going to work with a company that's working with him and have any chance that there could be some sort of crossover there. Like, that dude's never working in WWE again, ever, under any circumstance whatsoever. So, but there are probably a few other guys on that list as well. He's definitely at the top. There's very few, blacklisted people from WWE at this point. I think with Triple H in charge, he's still on there. He's going to be on there for a while.
I would say you're probably right.
Yeah.
And deservedly so. But yeah, interesting list for sure. It was good to get to chat about that a little bit. But the next year in wrestling is going to be very interesting. I feel like we need to have a podcast talking about what 2025 is going to hold in wrestling because there's a lot of contracts coming up and some. Could be some interesting debuts. Royal Rumble could be very interesting for sure, and it could be a lot of fun. I think, especially in WWE. I don't know so much about AEW, but hopefully they'll kind of get their act together. But before we wrap up tonight's podcast, the recap of the Survivor Series, I want to just talk briefly about NXT Deadline. It's the next premium live event that's coming up next Saturday, I believe it is, the 7th. Is that correct? Is that a Saturday?
That sounds right.
I'll let you guys confirm that.
December 7th, 2024.
And that is in Minneapolis at the Minneapolis Armory. Of course, NXT Deadline was kind of their answer to, well, we just took War Games from you. What are you going to do? You need a new gimmick match. So they came up with this idea of Deadline where wrestlers come out every 5 minutes.
The Iron Survivor Challenge.
Yeah, the Iron Survivor Challenge. And if you get pinned or submit, you get put in a penalty box for 90 seconds. And at the end of the 25-minute time limit, whoever has the most pins or submission victories is your Iron Survivor, and they earn a contract for a future title shot. And it was one of those things that I think they were still trying to kind of figure out how they were going to book this thing. And last year we had Trick Williams pull off the most ridiculous, incredible comeback.
That was a blast.
Right.
I'm not sure you could book it any better. It was perfect, and everything was perfect, and the timing couldn't have been any better. And of course, he's gone on to big things since then. You look at the matches as they're set right now. The men's Iron Survivor match is going to be Wesley versus Javon Evans versus Nathan Frazier versus Ethan Page versus the winner of the Last Chance qualifier this Tuesday on NXT. The women's match already is Sol Ruca and Stephanie Vaquer and Zarya and Julia plus one Last Chance qualifier. You have Trick Williams and Ridge Holland for the NXT title, which is going to have some influence by Eric Bischoff this Tuesday night. Don't know what that's going to be. And then Axiom and Nathan Frazier will also defend their tag titles against the winner of a tag team battle royal, which will be held this Tuesday night. Which, if you've not seen the brawl between the tag teams last week on NXT, it is absolutely worth going back and watching. It was all over the parking lot, guys getting thrown through cars.
It was fun.
It was an absolute blast for sure. So it could be really interesting. But I guess I want to go to each of you, kind of what you think as you look at this potential card. What stands out to you? We'll go Rachel first on this one.
I mean, the women's match is stacked. Having, Stephanie, Azaria, Julia, and I mean, somebody else, and obviously Sol Ruka is fantastic. That is going to be huge to get them really just started in NXT.
Mike, your thoughts?
What was amazing about the women's match, is how you have these kind of the big three new signings in the women's division all beat legit kind of next in line contenders to qualify for the match, where you're like, are they really going to have, Julia beat
Kalani Jordan?
Kalani Jordan.
Oh, yeah.
You had,
Ren Sinclair got beat by somebody.
Zarya, was it?
Zarya, I think.
Okay.
And then, what's her face with Out the Mud?
Oh, yeah. Her name escapes me at the moment. But
Jada Parker.
Yeah.
Jada Parker lost, or Zarya beat Jada Parker, my bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, you have these women who you think are kind of like the next in line to do something big. They've been booking really well, and they just line them up and knock them down at the hands of the new signing. So I thought that was pretty wild. Is Ridge Holland going to beat Trick Williams? I kind of feel like you have some kind of up and coming babyface singles challengers that could use a Ridge Holland.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The question I have, obviously, is will Chase U play any part in that match?
Who was it that called out
right?
Andre Chase in the end of that little?
Did they rehire Bodie Hayward or whatever his name was that they
would be
fired?
hilarious.
Oh man.
Or is there somebody from Chase's background that from back his independent days? Did he have a famous tag partner or something? I know he was Eddie Kingston, I think, for a while, right? Was as Harlem Bravado.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know if he had any other tag partners, maybe from the independent days, that show up in NXT to tell him, no, you got to keep pushing forward or something like that. But
I don't know.
It's interesting.
Maybe Eric Bischoff is starting a wrestling academy and he's hiring Andre Chase to teach there, and maybe Sean Waltman's going to attend so he can go back and get his degree.
Or maybe it's Adam Pearce, because remember Pearce posted a really nice post about Andre Chase on X a couple weeks ago, kind of talking about just their path in the past and working the independents and all that.
Maybe they're going to bring Andre Chase in to head up Alpha Academy, because Alpha Academy doesn't have a teacher.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I don't even know why they keep using that name, to be totally honest, but whatever.
I'm not sure, but it's going to be interesting to see. But yeah, I think a heel champion would make a lot of sense, potentially. It'll be, I'm not sure really, because again, you're Royal Rumble season now, so
Trick's going to be in the Rumble.
Trick will probably be in the Rumble. How many of these women in the Iron Survivor match could be in the Rumble?
Sure.
Yeah.
Because that's the other thing. When you talk about beating these established people, it tells me that they may not be long for NXT. They're, maybe you keep Julia a little longer because of the language thing. I think Stephanie Vaquer is a little farther ahead on English at this point, so maybe she stays, or she doesn't stay quite as long. And sorry, obviously from Australia, so wouldn't have
She'll never speak English.
Yeah, nobody will ever understand what she says. But yeah, so I don't know. Or maybe we're building a storyline, a second storyline where you have the new people feuding against established people, like we have with
Fatal Influence is going to get fatal influence.
Potentially, yes. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. And I would presume we'll get one more match on this card that has not been announced as of yet. Usually, again, 5 is kind of that sweet spot. So
yeah,
you'll have to tune into NXT. Everybody should be watching Tuesdays on the CW.
It is the most fun of any wrestling program on a weekly basis.
It is.
Yeah.
Even when things happen you don't like, or things happen that may not make sense, they're always more fun than when those things happen with any other wrestling show.
Well, I mean, what's going to happen with Shawn Michaels and Eddie Thorpe?
We could get into this, talk about this for 10 minutes. I still don't understand how a dude who is clearly the one running the TV show did not watch his TV show enough to understand exactly what happened. Because he clearly wasn't there when it went down, so he must have been sitting in Gorilla watching the show and would have known that it wasn't him that did it. And, even then, could have gone back and watched the replay,
Right.
and then apologized or
Instead of
something.
overreacting.
So yeah,
I just think he thinks Eddie Thorpe's a pest and just wanted a reason to blow up at him.
maybe
Yeah.
I don't know, but I'm not sure where that's going. But again, NXT, a lot of fun. Everybody should check it out. Final thoughts on the evening as we wrap up this podcast. Start with Rachel.
I love Survivor Series, so I mean, it was a good it was a good card all the way down. The matches were great. The winners were good. I don't know. I'm excited about what's coming up next.
Busy time in the wrestling world over the next few weeks for sure. Mike, your final thoughts.
It's easy to nitpick sometimes when WWE's doing so many things right. But
Yeah.
at the end of the night, when you're still invested and you want to know what is going to happen next in each of the storylines, they did their job.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you want some finality at times, but in the end, it is always building to that next show because that's how you keep viewers invested, and they've done a pretty good job of that too. And again, a lot of big things coming up. We got Deadline next week, Saturday night's main event in a couple of weeks on NBC, the first episode of Raw on Netflix. Presumably, there'll be news soon on both Raw and SmackDown, going back to 3 hours each. So you've got your women's mid-card title. We're going to get a U.S. champion on Saturday night's main event, and we'll get an Intercontinental title tournament of some sort starting Monday night on Raw. So there's a lot going on in the WWE universe, and certainly we'll try to continue to do our best to bring you that news as we can throughout the months on the Nerdcast Empire. But that is going to wrap things up for this Saturday night. We're not going to be gone for long because in less than 24 hours, Mike and I will be back with you for another episode of Music Weekly. It is the music of November the 15th, I believe, this week, and there's a lot of good stuff on this week's list. So really excited to get a chance to share our picks with you, share Mike's playlist, and talk about some stuff in the vault, too, some really good vault stuff. Mike's going to be getting to the letter O in glam bands, and I'm going to be talking about the year 2006 in music as we are getting close to the end of that cycle of the vault for me, but some really good stuff on both of those counts. So you're going to want to tune in tomorrow night, 7 o'clock Eastern Time, East Coast Time, U.S., here on the Nerdcast Empire. Big thanks to Stove Lake Media for their continued support of our podcast. Big thanks to Mike and Rachel, as always, for joining me. And big thanks to you, the listener, wherever you're hearing us. We appreciate you, especially if you join us live on twitch.tv/Nerdcast Empire. That's going to wrap things up for the entire crew. I'm Matt saying so long. Don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.